So on to introductions and to our wonderful guests. I'll start with myself first, though. You got my name, Nguyen, my pronouns, he, him, his, and I'll be moderating this panel today. And I realized in the art and the promotion materials for this event, I had sent my work file, but I'm not here for anything dealing with work. I'm here, quite honestly, because I myself am a survivor. And I'm here because I know how hard it is to be trapped in the reality of your sexuality without anyone else knowing. I know it feels to be trapped in depression and how hopeless that can feel. But more and most critically important, I know how it feels to have the mental health community help me save myself. And it has been the most single, profound thing in my life. And I really want to share all that community with you all today. I admit I'm nervous. I've never been so vulnerable to a room full of strangers, but it's important to me to learn and grow with you all in this short time that we have together. So let me go on to introducing the other panelists, and we try to bring together a lot of different perspectives. Our first panelist is an artist, is an art director, is a culture curator. She's designed and art curated some gorgeous pieces for clients like James Taylor, Harry Belafonte, and get this, Dancing with the Stars. And she is a self-appointed gay Asian icon. She's gonna have to get into why that is later, and a team member of the Queer Asian Social Club. So before the pandemic, the Queer Asian Social Club threw this Asian Queer Sunday Fun Day in Los Angeles. And when we're out of this pandemic, I cannot wait to party there. Everybody, please welcome Jamie Liu. Snaps for Jamie, everyone.
Oh my gosh, that was such a nice intro. Wow.
We see you, Jamie. Where are you joining us from, and how are you feeling today?
I am in Los Angeles and I'm feeling okay. In my mental health journey, I've, been in therapy, done so much self-healing, but then like this week, I had to come out to myself as depressed, and it's like a different kind of coming out. I didn't see it coming. And so I feel kind of just good to have admitted that to myself, but it's definitely that's definitely where I'm at right now as far as how I'm feeling.
Jamie, I've totally been there, and I totally resonate with that. Definitely what I've been feeling throughout the earlier part of this year. And that was the beginning of my journey. I'm in a better place now. And so hopefully the community will help you find your journey too. So thanks for sharing that, Jamie. And on our second panelist, though, who has been working deep in the LGBTQ, deep in the BIPOC, and deep in the low-income communities of San Francisco for 12 years. He's currently the clinical supervisor of the SF Community Health Center. And before going back to school to get his master's in social welfare, he ran a program targeting queer API folks called Aqua, which I'm also a graduate of. That brings me to the next point. He's a good friend of mine, and I have so much gratitude for him because he personally helped me start my own mental health journey earlier this year. So everyone, welcome to the conversation, Lance Dwyer. Hi, Lance.
Hi, Val. Hi, everyone. I use he, him pronouns, and where I'm at right now, I'm feeling moved and impacted by your vulnerability just now. And as Val said, we're good friends, and so I just feel impacted by your words right now. So that's where I'm at. And yesterday, as we found out that we're going to basically go back into shelter in place, got really anxious at that announcement, and I'm still processing that. I'm still not entirely sure why I had that reaction I did yesterday, and I'm still figuring that out. So I'm kind of in this uncertain place, a little bit anxious about what's to come next week. So, but very excited to be here, very honored to be here.
Yeah, and I know it's tough processing just so much that's out of our control, but still making the space to come here and share your experience, Lance. We're grateful for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, our next panelist is an artist and a photographer. Their self-portraits explore many facets of their identity. And seriously, I was just on their Instagram, and the portraits are stunning. The portraits deconstruct standards of beauty. They deconstruct gender in the process. And I can't wait for them to share their experiences and their expression through art with you all. Everyone, here's TJ Ramirez. Hi, TJ.
Hi. Like we said, I'm TJ. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And I don't know, I'm feeling good right now. I may be a little bit in denial about the fact that all of my final projects are due within the next week, but creatively I'm feeling quite fulfilled, and I'm really happy to partake in this conversation.
Well, awesome, TJ. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining us from Camarillo, which is like an hour and a half north of LA, pending traffic.
Awesome. A lot of SoCal, a lot of Cali folks on here, right? And Lance, you're joining from SF?
Yes. Yep.
Cool. West Coast represent. Well, our fourth panelist is also going to represent the West Coast. He's a clinical psychologist who spent 20 years helping people face issues like trauma, life transitions, depression, and mental illness. He's had different roles at the UC San Francisco Whale Institute for Neurosciences, including being an assistant clinical professor for the school's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. He's dedicated so much to evolve the mental health community to be more inclusive of LGBTQ, BIPOC, and other underserved communities. We have him to thank for a lot of that work that brought the community where it is today. So Sheening Lin, everyone welcome Sheening. Hey, Sheening.
Hey, Bao. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Sheening. My personal pronouns are he and his. I'm not going to bore you with my professional mental health journey. I'll say that my mental health journey began in college when I, as a junior, decided to go try out counseling for the first time at a point where it was very, very deep and dark point of my life. And it was like my first touch with what mental health and what paying attention to one's mental health and taking care of one's mental health can really do in terms of how transformative it is. And today, I just feel excited, so excited to see everyone here. This is amazing to see this kind of turnout. And because of the turnout, I feel a little nervous, but I think I'm going to get over it because I'm sure this is going to be a wonderful experience for all of us. So thank you, Val and Carrie, for inviting me.
Thanks, Sheening, for sharing that. We're grateful for you being so vulnerable, grateful for your contributions to the mental health community. All right, so let's get to our first question. And it's a bit of an icebreaker. And I kind of cheated because it's a double question. And some of you already answered part of the question. So for our panelists, what identities do you hold? And what has been your mental health journey? I shared a little bit about my mental health journey. The identities I hold are gay, queer, Vietnamese American, and like Jamie Liu, I am a Gaysian, but I'm not an icon yet. So Jamie's gotta teach me. She's gotta teach me how to be an icon. But with that, then I'll pass it over to Jamie. Jamie, what identities do you hold, and what has been your mental health journey?
I first of all disagree, and I do believe that you are a Gaysian icon. And I think being a Gaysian icon starts with proclaiming yourself as a Gaysian icon.
Okay, I get it.
Especially because there's no precursor. Like we are searching so hard for Gaysian icons, and there comes a time when you turn around and it's like, I think it's me. Well, so I go by the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm a queer femme, American child of Korean immigrants. I'm an artist, an art director, culture creator, and as Val said, a self-proclaimed Gaysian icon. And I'm also a very proud team member of Creation Social Club, which is a collective that aims to just joyfully increase queer Asian visibility and representation. So my mental health journey, as I said, I've been going to therapy for a long time, since 2012. And if you had told me at the beginning of that I would 8 years later still be in therapy, I would be scared of that answer. But it turns out that healing is just a journey, and it's an ongoing thing, because the more you work through what you need to heal in the beginning of your mental health journey, the more that is presented to you that you continue to need to heal, because you understand that you can handle the next level of healing. And so it's a continuing journey of therapy and everything from just doing dance. I've done it all, and we're still going.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with me, Jamie. And I guess I was going to ask you where I applied to be a Gaysian icon, but I guess I applied to myself. So
yeah, you're
we're on
it.
this journey together.
You're it.
Thanks, Jamie. Maybe I'll shoot it over to Sheening. Sheening, what identities do you hold? And you've talked about your mental health journey already, but if you want to add anything to that, feel free.
Sure. So I identify as a queer, gay, cisgender Taiwanese American man. I'm the son of first generation immigrants. And I guess, so my mental health journey, I think maybe I'll talk about something that most folks may not know I've been a therapist for a little over 20 years now, practicing in lots of different settings, mainly community mental health, mainly serving traditionally underserved populations, including the queer community. But a big part of my own therapy practice has been being in my own therapy for most of the last 20 years. So it's not so hidden secret that a lot of therapists and psychologists are in their own therapy, because a part of it is just like, we got to practice what we preach, right? If we want to destigmatize mental health in different communities, we have to be able to be doing that work ourselves, and also being able to be open and talking about it. So my mental health journey has both been one where through that work, I've certainly done a lot of self-enrichment, gotten through a lot of hard times. I'm not sure how it would have turned out if I hadn't had that space. And it's also a space where I continue to learn about how therapy is changing. And most recently, the widespread use of teletherapy, right? Telehealth. Maybe we'll get to talk about that a little bit later. So lots of exciting developments in terms of like how accessible therapy is. So yeah, I guess that's been my own personal journey.
Awesome. Thanks, Sheening. Let me shoot this question over to TJ. What identities do you hold and mental health journey?
Okay. Oh, identities. That's such a fun one. I feel like I have so many to play with. I am Filipino. I am Dominican. I am bisexual. I would consider myself both non-binary and trans. I feel like a lot of my identity also comes from the fact that I have a chronic illness. I have lupus, and like, I don't know. I feel like those are probably the the big words that I would play with when describing myself. And those all play into my mental health journey. I would say right now, I just found a new therapist, which was great because I had been without one for a month, as happens sometimes. And it's just like one of those things where I've been in therapy for probably like 3 or 4 years now, on and off. And I think it was so stigmatized for so long, but once I got started, I'm such a fan. Like I'm always like, oh, therapy. Or like this week I said this to my therapist. And I think that it's one of those things that, you know, when accessible and available to you emotionally or otherwise, for me at least, I found it really healing and really helpful. So far we're doing okay with a little help.
Awesome. Thanks, TJ. Congrats on finding the help that you feel comfortable with and this journey to healing. We all know finding a therapist you like is hard. It's like harder than Tinder and Hinge, everybody. All right. I'm glad that you found one, and then we can get a little bit into the process of finding one for everyone else out there who's considering that in a bit. And last but not least, Lance, what identities do you hold and mental health journey?
Yeah, I think I'm going to take this opportunity to identify as a Asian icon too. So, yes. I'm going to add that to my identities and bios. But in addition, I'm a gay Filipinx American male, and I guess similar to Sheening, I first got into therapy my junior year of college, and I think throughout my senior year also, I got into a bad car accident, I got into my first relationship, first breakup, and I was in school studying journalism, but I had toyed with the idea of being a therapist before, so I don't think I was weighed down by stigma. I was excited to see what therapy was, and now I do have a great therapist that I was really lucky to find. It can be really hard, and I just kind of was lucky to stumble into the perfect person. And it's been kind of short-term a la carte therapy. I'll just jump into some self-disclosure and vulnerability, which you modeled, Bao. But I've experienced a lot of loss. In 2014, my dad died. 2016, my sister died. And in 2018, my mom died. So my therapist has seen me through all those times, and I sort of go in for like my tune-up. She might not hear from me in years, really, and then I have a big crisis for her to guide me through. And I can't quite afford to see her regularly, so I'm fortunate to have friends who are from school who are therapists who are much more intelligent than I am, much more talented therapists than I am. So I lean on them just enough that I don't overburden them, and then I call on my therapist when needed. So. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. I'm still working with her, and right now I'm actually doing some work with her at the moment. So kind of a few times a year.
Well, thanks for sharing that journey, Lance. Just having been your friend over the last few years, that was just a whole lot of grief to have to process. And that's why I turned to you, right, when I needed some of that help. So grateful for you sharing that, and grateful for your friendship. We had a comment in this chat that South Asians are underrepresented. And so I want to take this moment to say, like, all of us on this panel, unfortunately, cannot represent the full spectrum of diversity within the Asian American community, within the queer community. But the good news is this is the start of a conversation, not the only conversation. I'm going to move on to our first question, and it's a big question, and it's unpacking the concept of family. And so I want to know what folks' experience has been around family, whether it's biological, chosen, adopted, or otherwise. It's a big topic, and I know it's broad, but it's the crux of a lot of the questions that we got before we started this panel from our attendees. And so why don't we start with Lance on this topic? Family, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, family and family acceptance, it's so important. And I have found that if someone doesn't have it, we might find we're spending much of our adult life chasing it from our actual parents and from our other intimate relationships in our life. So my main approach to therapy, without, I think, getting too much into the weeds, the details, is sort of looking for negative beliefs we've taken on about ourselves, and in response to like negative experiences or various experiences, really. So family rejection isn't just on one extreme, abuse and being disowned. It's also not being able to wear your hair the way you'd like, or not being able to share that you're obsessed with Ariana Grande or Britney Spears, in my case. And being accepted and seen is so healing. So once you find, if you haven't gotten it from your family, once you find friends and chosen family who get you, who think you're smart, fun, a good dancer, all that stuff can be everything on your mental health journey and mental health and healing journey.
Well, thanks, Lance. Anyone else on the panel want to jump in on that? All right. Well, I know go ahead, Sheening.
I can real quick. I think that when we think of family, we typically think of biological family, and I think that the challenge for many of us is that, at some point there's a reckoning of what we can get from our biological family at a given moment and how that may or may not match up with what we need. And so I think the development of a chosen family, and finding and creating a chosen family and nurturing that is so critical to mental health, especially I think in the queer community and LGBTQ community. And so I think that the challenge also is to not say, well, I'm just going to do one versus the other, that both areas need nurturing, and that's a process, and that requires patience and perseverance from all of us, including our family members as well. So it's one of the things that I try to keep in mind.
Yeah, and if I'd offer too, it's, when I first came out, it was in the early 2000s. And so what I had thought about coming out, or what I had thought about how my biological family would react, or how I thought about finding a chosen family, was modeled in the media, right? And I'll date myself, and it was modeled after this show called Queer as Folk, which if you watch now, it's quite outdated. It would be definitely canceled in just a couple of episodes if it were to come out today. But what I'd realized was that because of the cultures that we hold, which is, for me, Vietnamese American, my parents were refugees in the first generation here, it is not as realistic to model what you're going to expect from coming out, what you're going to expect from your family, and what are you going to expect from finding chosen family, being an Asian face in a club full of white people, from those movies. And so it took me quite a while to give myself the patience to kind of let things grow and evolve in ways that I might not expect. And it has been a very worthwhile and a worthwhile ride. Well, I know we'll cover this topic in a bunch of the other questions. So I'll jump into this next question, which a lot of people had questions on, which is, it's 2020. It's the year of Miss Rona, COVID-19 as the scientists call her. So we're interested in how it's impacted life for you all, or specifically relating to your identities as queer and Asian folks. And Jamie, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking on what Sheening and Lance said about family and chosen family, I think COVID-19 has really affected that sense of family and belonging for me, because my chosen family, we love sharing space together. We love like laying on top of each other, and to have that fact, that like possibility taken out, and then to have also like different belief systems within my chosen family, like these people. And it's been really interesting because like my family of origin, when I came out to them like 7 years ago, my family of origin and I became pretty estranged. And so having a chosen family that like you felt belonging by like being your entire self and feeling like you understand each other and like your belief systems align, like that is so healing. And then COVID-19 has presented this other part where it's like, okay, now your chosen family is starting to have different belief systems than you, and it's like there's definitely something that's very triggering about that. But at the same time, like as this is happening, like I've actually connected a lot more with my family of origin, like have after like 7 or 8 years of not really talking to my sister, like have been reconnecting and just like seeing each other as grown-ups. And like it's been so healing to see that, like even though when you come out or these like things happen where you feel like you don't belong, that even that you can have the patience for that to shift and change, even if it takes like almost a decade, is kind of remarkable. And so I think it's interesting because, as I said, I think family is the sense of belonging. And Brene Brown has once said that the true,
Yes, Brene Brown.
One of our favorite white
my
ladies,
queen.
one of our favorite white ladies from Texas.
Yes.
She said that true belonging allows for dissent and disagreement, because if you're all the same and if you're all responding to COVID-19 in the exact same way, and you're like, you don't belong here because of your belief systems, like you never truly belonged in the first place, like to be able to like have boundaries and step back from your relationships, like, and to believe and trusting that they're still going to be there for you and that they still love you, even if it's different, even if it's from afar, like that is true love and belonging. And so like it's been such a journey with COVID-19. It's presented a lot of challenges, and just like thrown in a monkey wrench, and to really test what these relationships can handle and how they will look like. So
yeah. And Jamie, when chosen family starts feeling or making like different value system than you, do you mean in terms of quarantining, following the health guidelines? I see. Yeah. That's a big topic this year.
Yeah, it's that like the weird social navigation of one of your closest friends being like, hey, I really miss you, can we please hang out? And you're like, yes, but no. And it's just never something that has ever had to come up. You've never had to test that in your relationship with chosen family, to have a boundary, because like they're your chosen family. Like the point is that like you could just be yourself, and now you're being challenged to test those relationships by like having a boundary and knowing that you're still going to belong and you're still going to be loved and be okay.
Yeah. And a lot of people are thinking about that right now when the New York Times writes a piece like, is it okay to take a break from your friend this year? And so a lot of people share that. And so Jamie, thanks for bringing up that topic. And also, I think TJ, you have something to say on this too, right?
Yeah. Oh, that was so good. I think it's really important when you talk about belonging and family. What is family other than something that connects us, whether it be a biological connection or like our chosen family? I think that it's so important to examine like what support systems we need in different aspects of our life, whether it be in queerness or whether it be in the things that we like quite literally might need help with, like people who will help wash your dishes when you're not feeling like it that day. Like I think that, I don't know, it's definitely been a huge shift in terms of the different families and support systems that you have access to right now. And so I think for me personally, and probably a lot of other people, lack of affirmation is a thing that's going to happen if the people you are isolated with maybe don't affirm certain aspects of your identity. Like for me and a lot of other trans people, there's probably a bit of a pronoun deficit when it comes to hearing your pronouns. And that's something I didn't realize I had come to take for granted because I was surrounding myself with that chosen family and getting that physical touch and that constant, if not hearing, just like knowing that I'm being seen for who I am. And so I think like communication and the way that it's been impacted by COVID-19 is one of the biggest ways that we are affected, because communication is how we form identity, So I think that when your identity and the way you create it is suddenly less under your control or a lot more limited, it's really interesting to examine these intersecting identities that a lot of us deal with.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that, TJ, in that spending a lot more time with my family since moving back to LA. And I realized, when I lived in San Francisco for 10 years before moving here, that whenever I visited, we kept things on the surface level for Thanksgiving, right? But now being with my family for hours on end, you see the paper cuts start coming through, right? They watch the news and something queer comes up and then someone says something and do I interject now or not? It's exhausting. And so it's not nowhere near the level where I think you may have experienced it, TJ, as you describe it, but it just resonates with me. And also I would also like friends who would come over to do dishes for me when I need it. So I will ask you how you've done that. In the meantime, we'll move on to our next question. And it's the big one, and I'm hoping Sheening and Lance can help me out on this one. It's about mental health stigma in our communities, right? In the queer communities, in the Asian American community. Talk about that a little bit. And then also just outside of stigma, what else is at play that's preventing us from pursuing mental health resources as we should in our community? And Lance, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I just want to frame it that I'm speaking from my experience. I'm drawing from like 4 years of running a queer youth program for APIs, as Val mentioned, and then the clients I speak to, and then my own experiences as a Filipinx gay male. So, but I'm going to still kind of somewhat wildly speculate on this question a bit. There's not a ton of research, to back up but what we feel and maybe know to be true, but I'm going to speak from that place. So just obviously like in the chats, if you have an experience that's different from mine, please, obviously plenty of space for that and would welcome that. So what I do know, there is a disconnect on mental health between first, second, and third generations. I'm thinking of first as folks who immigrated here. So my parents who born in the Philippines and immigrated here, and then I would identify as a second generation. Some might, have a different scale for that, but that's what I'm operating under, just to say. And my parents, for example, dealt with martial law, and some of my relatives did have to come to America to escape some form of persecution. And so that's very different from my experience. And so I think, we got close to that, though. We are close to that here in America, but not quite there, fortunately. We are, do have a lot of different privileges and benefits here, but there's the Maslow hierarchy of needs. So maybe the older generation or immigrants who were running from some sort of oppressive situation were content to just have their basic needs met and have stable food, home and food. So hopefully second and third generation folks have the privilege of wanting more, wanting to be what's called self-actualized. So to dream big and want to have a purpose that guides us, right? So with that comes struggle and pain, because we see the world differently and it takes work to find a purpose and be self-actualized. So there can be kind of that disconnect with our parents, like not understanding why we want to get into therapy, not modeling, sharing emotions and feelings, not sharing that we're struggling, lack of vulnerability. So that's what I've seen in my experiences. And yeah, just drawing from like what I know about my mental health and therapy, I think that's a big part of it. And then you said challenges a bit too to finding.
Yeah, just outside of the stigma, is there anything else that's some of the barriers for folks in our communities to getting help?
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard to find a good therapist. I think that is something, like I've heard really terrible stories from friends. So yeah, I haven't fortunately had that experience myself or met other therapists who I know aren't up to par, but I've heard so many terrible stories. So it can be really hard and discouraging to do all the work to find a therapist. I'm hearing folks like will call 10 people and not hear back, which is unfortunate, and then it's easy to get discouraged at that point. And I think what could be different about wanting to see someone work with someone who looks like you, who identifies as you. I think in the Filipinx culture, we might want to see someone who we generally would want to see someone who is Filipino, that would feel more comfortable and safe, I would think. I've heard sort of a mentor who did a training who's Korean American. She said it was the opposite, that a Korean family, when they found out she was Korean, they fired her basically before they met, because they didn't, all the shame of like being able to having to share that the family was struggling to another Korean, was going to be too much and wouldn't have helped the process. So yeah, so I guess, and it can be really different between each API culture.
Yeah, I think what you talked about in terms of the hierarchy of needs and parents, and to me, it's what I've been thinking a lot about, right? Intergenerational trauma. I'm not at the point where I'm honest to my parents about going to therapy. I don't think I need to find a better way of talking through it with them, because I feel like they would blame themselves, like they did something wrong, right? But that is kind of something that I'm working through. And, the stigma, I remember, Jamie, you mentioned like when you finally came out to yourself as depressed this week, right? I remember that moment, but I still remember the stigma of like, oh, do I go to get therapy that's only for rich white people or for people who need it more than I do? Like, I don't deserve it, right? And I like to send the message out there, if you're looking, you deserve it. And there's just all these other things at play that make you think you don't. And Sheening, what do you think of this question around stigma and all these barriers that might prevent folks from our community from getting help?
Yeah, it's, I first of all, I agree with everything Lance said. I think it's a really complex issue, and I could give you my own example that would illustrate that. So I have two older cousins who have had schizophrenia for most of their lives. And they used to live in the States for a little while, but now they live in Taiwan. And so my aunt, who was their caretaker at this point, she has never openly talked to me about their diagnosis or the struggles that she has around care, or the struggles that my cousins have, even though she's known that I'm a psychologist for many, many years. And so I think even within a family system where there are first degree relatives, that are struggling with chronic mental illness, right, or chronic mental health issues, it's really tough to be open about it. So when I mentioned earlier, like my first experience with therapy was as a junior in college. What I didn't mention then is I was pretty depressed. And I went to the therapist, and rather than going to my parents, because my parents' only idea of what it meant to have mental health issues was based on the frame of my two cousins who had very scary experiences that my parents knew about when they were younger. So I think that I feel like I've spent the majority of my career trying to break down some of those barriers. Working in a major metropolitan area, working in San Francisco, I worked at a public high school as the school psychologist for years. And I did it on purpose because I knew that especially the communities of color, and especially the queer communities of color, that some of these kids were never going to be able to get through services by telling their parents, hey, I need to go see someone, So we had a way to be able to see kids above a certain age under minor consent. They could consent for their own services in California, which was amazing. It opened up a lot of different avenues, I think, for young adults in this case to get access to services and have that kind of positive experience going through school. So I think the barriers, the continuing barriers around mental health have to do with access, but also have to do with this, I think, an idea of self-reliance and something that I certainly feel like was instilled to me by my parents. It's kind of like, you take care of yourself, you can't depend on others. My parents came here and didn't have any extended family even visit for like 15, 20 years. And so my sister and I grew up in an environment where we were taught that we needed to be able to take care of ourselves in all ways, including our own mental health. So I think that can be a barrier in the sense that if that's part of your own self-concept and how you feel like your family values you, it can be hard to just say, hey, I need some help, whether it be seeing a therapist, whether it be seeing a counselor, whether it be talking to a mentor, whether it be talking to like a group of trusted friends. But I think that is definitely changing. It's certainly changed during the course of my career in terms of people's attitudes around accessing mental health.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm heartened just by this conversation that we're having. and the vulnerability that you're all exhibiting, and also that folks are exhibiting in this chat, that we'll definitely get to a better place and build a stronger community around mental health. Well, the next topic I do want to talk about, and TJ, maybe I'll ask you this to address it first. This is a question that we got from one of the attendees in this Zoom. What are some of the ways to explore and figure out your gender identity?
Okay, so I think it'd probably be best to answer this in two parts, like one pre self-isolation and one during. I think that before, at least for me, a lot of it had to do with clothing and fashion exploration. And this was a long time before I even realized I was trans, like starting to experiment with clothing that appeared more quote unquote masculine or feminine, sliding between different extremes, incorporating pieces that were gendered one way or the other. And I found that just sort of analyzing my own comfort in space and my own comfort in space with other people was something that really helped me connect to this idea of questioning my gender, as well as becoming more and more certain in it. Because I didn't even think to ask the question until I had seen online other people presenting different ways. And it's so funny how that took such like a fandom centric turn for me and I guess my generation. But it was first like, oh, I didn't realize I could choose to dress like this. And as I started realizing that those choices served me, I think that for me was key to my exploration. And then as far as right now, it was really interesting because all of a sudden the way that I dress, which is super indicative of my experience. And I feel like it's not so much that I'm saying like, oh, I want you to look at me and know that I am not a girl or know that I am not anything in particular. It's just the idea that the way I dress communicates something about my experience that is more true than I guess if you had been using like a she, her pronoun for me in the past. But now I'm not doing that. So it's like the questions I was asking myself as I sort of started to experience that second wave gender crisis was, who am I outside of my gender experience? Aspects of interacting with the concept of gender make me feel good. What makes me feel bad? And I think that looking at that has allowed me to investigate a lot more my relationship with both the concept of transness and my identity outside of that. And it's one of those things where, and again, very personal to me, probably different for a lot of people, but like I'd never considered testosterone before or like physical transition because I felt very used to the way I had been treated by other people. But I started realizing when I was looking at myself and acknowledging myself, I was like, oh, when I'm not concerned about presenting a palatable version of myself to other people, I'm interested in exploring the changes in my body that obviously I can't control right now and would still be out of control in a different situation. But it was such an interesting gender experience to question alone, I think. So that was just my take on gender exploration.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks here are exploring that. And what I found interesting, and then you may want to talk about this a little bit, TJ, I invite you to, is, how does this inform you as an artist, as a photographer, as that like fire Instagram feed that you have? How does that expression convert into your art?
Oh my goodness, it's everything. And I feel like I have so many identities that it's silly that gender takes such a forefront, but photography is such a good venue for that. And I talked about this with the last talk that I did with the Asian Mental Health Project. And I think that for me, I started photography because I wanted to see myself as something that I had trouble seeing myself as. Like I was very, very the opposite of self-confident. I was very unsure. I grew up in predominantly white areas, like really small Catholic school class sizes where I was like, well, I don't have freckles and I'm not the smartest one in the class. What does that mean for me and who I am? And photography has allowed me to present myself across the gender spectrum. In an image, people are limited to what I can curate, which, on one hand is like, oh, that's a lot of power and getting too controlling over that is not good for mental health either. But on the other side of it, it's allowed me to break barriers for other people where I think they would never see me as like a model or a subject or a leading man per se. But in the images that I've created, I feel comfortable saying like, no, that's a beautiful person. That is a person who is not limited by gender. That is a person who is not inherently a girl, which is probably the most important thing to me personally. But yeah, I think it's the extension of fashion and clothing choices into the idea of an image that feels true. And so I think manufacturing those, whether or not you're a photographer or consider yourself that, creating, both loving yourself, having that one side of trusting and believing in who you are and owning the vessel you are in, but also acknowledging that there is space for you to exist in that and create an image of yourself that feels honest and gives that honesty to other people when you choose to do so.
Thanks for sharing that, TJ, and all of everyone in that chat. You got to jump on Instagram and check this all out. I want to also pose this question to Lance, given his experience and his role with the SF Community Health Center and the clients that he sees.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, TJ. Definitely what TJ had to say was way more important and pertinent than anything I'm going to share, but just want to center the fact that I'm drawing from my experiences working with trans and gender nonconforming folks over the last 4 years. And I do acknowledge that I want to name that we are in a capitalist society where mental wellness, mental health is treated as a privilege when really it's a right. So I know that not everyone can see a therapist. I mean, there are various opportunities if you can't afford it, but it is a privilege, unfortunately. But if you can get therapy, and ideally from a transgender nonconforming therapist, or at least someone who's an ally and educated on trans issues, that can obviously really help. I do my best personally to be active and a dedicated ally, to be not transphobic, right? So, and I think part of what therapy, the benefits of therapy, you can understand how your brain works. You might have a bunch of thoughts, feelings, and experiences that might feel like a dark, tangled up mess, but therapy can be a sounding board and help you sort of organize and build awareness. So I guess I can share one example of a person I've worked with who has sort of been stuck and unsure of how they want to present with their gender and what steps they want to take. So we, over maybe like a couple months, been able to identify that there's internalized transphobia, internalized toxic masculinity, misogyny, which is, we can find is so insidious in so many ways. Like what doesn't toxic masculinity and misogyny affect, right? And the shame of coming out to parents, this person is Chinese American, and the factor of romance, so determining will they identify as a lesbian trans woman, for example, thinking about sexuality, will they attract the people that they're attracted to currently? So that's a factor holding them back. And then as CJ put it, kind of even thinking about the body parts that may or may not serve you. That's the part that might come last for this person that I'm working with. Of, does this body part serve me? Does this, do I want to transition? And I think people might have the idea that once you decide you want to transition, it has to be, okay, I'm going to get every single procedure, but it's definitely not like that. But folks might still be operating within that box. So that's a process to kind of meditate on that and just really check in with themselves about like what in my presentation, what in my body is really serving me right now.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Lance. That experience is incredibly helpful. And again, offering for folks who have more questions, want to dig deeper, to contact Lance and TJ after this session. We'll have both of their contact info up. We have 20 minutes left. So I'm going to combine the next two questions, which is about the holidays. Like I told Carrie, I was trying to find a K-pop holiday song to start this Zoom meeting off with, but we agreed Ariana Grande, Megan Thee Stallion is great. But on the topic of the holidays, a lot of us are going to be back here with our families. And so I was just interested in picking some of your brains about how you find acceptance during the holidays and how you set boundaries. And maybe we can start with the boundaries and Sheening. How do you set boundaries during the holidays, or how can other people do that too?
I think you do your best to plan ahead of time and have a game plan, and then know that that might go completely out the window once you actually interact with people. I think it starts with, I think just sitting down and deciding, well, what are we hoping to get out of the holidays, and especially with interpersonal connections, whether it be with family or friends or even colleagues at work or at school. And I think it's a big part of it is giving ourselves permission to have those boundaries. It doesn't always feel good to assert them, and preparing for how people might respond, and being able to know that for yourself, that these are the things that are part of my self-care regimen, even if it is a close family member. When I think about the holidays, if it was a pre-pandemic, what I would normally say, both to myself and to clients I work with, is make sure that you have some allies that you can contact, during the holidays, because you never know when you might need to phone a friend, or just be able to have a quick contact with someone saying, yeah, this is going a little rough. Because I think that it's the aloneness when things don't go well that make it difficult to stick to the boundaries that you set for yourself in terms of self-care. So I'll pause there, because I think everyone has different ways to approach this.
Yeah, and I totally feel that, Sheening, just from my personal experience. We set boundaries for Thanksgiving dinner. Let's just say the people who came to Thanksgiving dinner this year from my family are politically diverse. And given the results of the election, I think we set a boundary not to talk about politics. It didn't last very long, but I had prepared for it kind of going out the window because it had before. But you just kind of just sit in the discomfort of it and continue to move on and learn for next time. Is what I took from it, but it may not work for everyone. Just on this idea of acceptance during the holidays, and we talked, TJ, you had some advice, right? And I thought it was super helpful.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I got so sidetracked in my little brain. I think that for me, I've been really enjoying connecting a lot more with my friends, like over FaceTime and whatnot, because I know at the beginning of the pandemic, it was really hard to find the energy to like reach out to people or to maintain that sort of contact. And I think that, like we said, it's really important to not feel alone. And I didn't realize until I had been doing like a Zoom play and I was in rehearsals for 3 hours a day, where I was like, if I can do this for 3 hours a day, I can call one of my friends for 15 minutes before I go to bed tonight. And that was just so enriching to start taking part in those habits.
Nice. In terms of a boundary, I think, Lance, how do you approach this?
Sure, yeah, so just to add a little bit, I think a quote that I found on Instagram that I really like is, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. And when I saw that, I was just like, it puts it so well, so poignantly. And that was said by Prentice Hempel, who was also a therapist, probably not in California, I'm not sure, but you can look up Prentice Hempel for more about, I don't know Prentice's pronouns, but Prentice's work. And yeah, I don't know, just an example, like I still have a really big extended family. And so I set up a Zoom last week for Thanksgiving. And the boundary I set was just that it's going to be from this time to this time. Like, I don't want this dragging on for 4 hours. I don't want people, Filipino time, as we call it, coming in 5 minutes before we're about to get off. It's like, it's going to be this end time. That's a boundary too, right? It's the amount of time I wanted to take and spend with each other. And we still went 30 minutes over, but it was good. It was really nice. So at least we had the initial boundary that we renegotiated at that point.
Thanks, Lance. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to go to our last question, which is about queer positive mental health resources, whether it's therapy or things outside of therapy. And I'll go around and ask each panelist what the tips they recommend on therapy and kind of what other mental health resources, be it Instagram or organizations, they'd recommend. And after that, we're going to take questions from the chat. So if you guys have any questions from the chat, start thinking about it now, type those in, and we'll try our best to get to them. So let's start with you, Jamie. What tips do you have on getting started with therapy, and what are some of your favorite resources that you want everyone to know about?
Yeah, my tips with therapy, finding a therapist, is the same as dating advice. Don't settle and go with healing. Because it is absolutely like paramount that you feel 1,000,000% safe and seen by the person that you're choosing to do this work with. Because if there's any like yellow flag for you to want to build up your walls around this person, the work that you do in therapy is not going to be effective. And so have patience and be honest with yourself. It's annoying that you have to date for therapists as well as in your romantic life. That's really annoying, but it's really worth testing the waters before committing to something deeper. I also want to say that it's like totally okay to be scared about what therapy is going to be like before you start doing it. And like I said before, the beautiful thing about therapy is that even though you will come up against really challenging things that you have to work through and heal through. It like the more you work through like a trauma or a problem, like the more tools of like your own resilience and strength you will also receive at the same time. And so it's like, as you level up, you level up. So like there's never going to be a step that like just smacks you in the face. It's a process, and it's a step-by-step process, and it's okay to be scared at the beginning, but it's what you want, it's what you make it to be. So it's going to be okay. And then as far as queer positive mental health resources outside of therapy, I just wanted to give a little shout out to Creation Social Club. And we just launched a couple weeks ago a webzine project called Disorient. And it's just like a collection of different stories and art and perspectives and interviews of different people in the queer Asian community. And I think amazing mental health resource for queer Asians is just seeing other queer Asians and like not feeling alone in your identity is like huge therapy. And so, you know, on Instagram, everywhere, there's so many people who are being their own Asian icons. If you want to go look for them, but I would for sure shout out Creation Social Club, Disorient.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. I mean, you bring up that point, which was my experience in that, you know, when I was depressed and I started following Brown Girl Therapy, because I just felt like each time I read one of the posts, it healed me a little bit. And that got me to thinking more seriously about getting therapy. And I just think that is just the beauty with all the ails of social media. That's one beauty, right? Being introduced to a lot of these concepts in kind of introductory and safe ways before deciding to do that hard work, right? Working with the therapy through your traumas and healing that way. And so I totally resonated with that. Sheening, what are some of the resources and some tips you have for getting to therapy or getting started with therapy?
I agree with everything Jamie said about the beginning of therapy and therapy being a dating process. When we think about therapy, there's so many different approaches from the therapist end and also from the customer end. But what we know from decades of research is that the thing that predicts a better outcome is the connection between the therapist and the client. So it's okay to shop around and don't, you know, I think that the things I say right up front, don't be afraid to ask for what you want, you know, or what you're looking for. Any good therapist will be willing to talk with you at least by phone for 10 or 15 minutes without charge. So you can have some idea of understanding how they work and how, they can understand what you're looking for. Patients, like you may end up calling multiple people. Some people won't call you back if they don't have any room in their practice. And then I think that the last thing I would say is, even if you start with a therapist who has similar identities to you, don't presume that they know your experience, you know, and don't be afraid to ask. So one of the things that I advise folks to do, and I kind of learned this myself in my own therapy work, is when I didn't think or wasn't sure whether the therapist understood my experience, I named it. I said, I'm not sure if you understand this part of my experience or how this part of my identity affects my experience. And I need to know that if you don't know, that you're going to tell me, because I'm willing to help you understand or learn, but I can't know what you don't know if you are not being open about that, you know. So therapists and psychologists, they're not always going to know the answers. And I think it's actually part of the healthy part about the therapeutic relationship when there can be candor around that.
Yeah, Sheening, and I think some of that candor is hard, right? It's like emailing the therapist is like setting up your Tinder profile. Like you got to list to a complete stranger that you want to deal with a certain trauma that's so personal to you that most of your friends and family don't know about, but it's worth it, right? Like someone had asked me last night actually about finding therapy, and she's like, it's so weird to type that out into an email to someone I barely know. Like, but you want to do this work, right? And I just had to acknowledge it is so vulnerable and uncomfortable, but completely worth it. Completely worth it. Lance, so tips on getting started with therapy and some other mental health resources.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, definitely thanks, Jamie and Sheening, and the Alliance, as Sheening mentioned, is one of like the top 5 or main things that I took away from grad school. Just your connection with your therapist is going to be more important than any their training or what school they went to, anything like that. But with that said, I do take a look at the program and the school they went to. That is partially important to me. You give everyone a chance, of course, but if you look at their program and ratings and reviews that they went to for grad school, that can inform and help filter a little bit. Does a school and institution hold up social justice and equity as values that are really up front and center? For example, that's really important. So that can help, but it really is going to come down to like meeting the person or talking to the person for that typical 15-minute free consultation. And yeah, just, checking in with yourself and feeling like, do I like this person? Check in with your gut. Do I see myself meeting with this person every week for months or years? Could I imagine that? Do I respect this person? To check in with those kinds of things to ask yourself. And in terms of resources, I know maybe most are in California, but not all. So some of these won't apply to everyone, but at SF Community Health, where I work, you can look us up at sfcommunityhealth.org. And we take Medi-Cal. And right now, since telehealth has really developed, we can see anyone in the state pretty much, like anyone. For my license can cover anyone in the state, for example, to anywhere throughout California. We do have grant funding to cover therapy. I think at least most of the costs, if not all of the costs, for folks who identify as Asian Pacific Islander. So that's something. And Queer Life Space is also in Oregon, San Francisco. And during the pandemic, I actually started working with BetterHelp. And I think that's actually the easiest way to get started, I would say. I can't speak for the quality of therapists across the whole, the whole organization, the whole company, but you can keep switching until you find somebody too. Pride Counseling is actually kind of a sister organization of BetterHelp, so you can start with them. And they should all be folks who identify as queer or are allies for sure. Some things I follow, the Holistic Psychologist on Instagram has been great. Prentice Hempel, their Instagram handle is prentice.h on Instagram, is also great. And Family Acceptance Project is a great resource to share, a lot of resources to share with your family towards acceptance. And then actually what Jamie mentioned to me reminded me of NCAPIA, National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. It's a national org that I've worked with in the past. And they have a lot of resources in different languages that you can share with your family towards acceptance and LGBTQ identity. But they have a conference every 3 years. It was supposed to be in Atlanta next year. I have a feeling it's going to be postponed or go virtual, which will be a big loss. But I feel like it's the closest I've experienced to Burning Man. Like it feels like this sense of home, being seen by queer API folks, all different types of abilities, all different from all over the world, really. It's just one of the most affirming experiences I've had, I would say. So look out for it if it is postponed, or if it does miraculously happen next year. Definitely look up for NCAPIA, the conference.
Well, thanks for that list, Lance, and thank Carrie for dropping in all the links here for folks to follow. And of course, always follow Asian Mental Health Project on Instagram. And so TJ, I want to throw this question over to you.
Oh, everybody had such good answers. Just, I guess, tagging on to all of that, I think that, I don't know, I just can't wait to go follow everything that's been put in the chat. I'm so excited. On top of that, as far as like other mental health resources, these aren't queer or Asian specific, but I have a lot of trouble like drinking water and sleeping. So I love those little plant apps that you can get that are like, your plant needs water. And I'm like, oh, I should drink 8 ounces of water. It's simple things like that that really help with, I think, the day-to-day of mental health, like the stuff that makes, at least like those are the things I notice first, I think, before I'm like, oh, I'm processing something. It's like, oh, I forgot to take care of this. So I think that doing those things and taking care of yourself in that way is like something you can do on top of therapy, or if you cannot access therapy.
Awesome. Thanks, TJ. So we're almost running out of time, and I think we're covering a lot of topics. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. And so I think I would like to take this time to thank everyone in the chat for coming and allowing yourself to contribute to this conversation that we've had today. And I'll start off with a closing question from all the panelists, but I also want to hear what your answers are in the chat. So answer this closing question. Why is self-care important? And what did you do in service of self-care this week? Jamie, let's start with you. Self-care.
Self-care. I think self-care is important because I think we're all descendants of both of love and joy, but also some deeply unresolved pain and trauma of our ancestors. And so I think self-care is important because self-care is healing, and healing yourself and your lineage is absolutely the first step to contributing to the healing of the world. And so self-care this week was letting myself not finish things on my to-do list and being totally okay with that. Like last night, I was up until 12:30 a.m. just high and like laughing with some of my best friends from elementary school and middle school, and it was like the best. And so my self-care was just not putting a time frame on joy.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Lance, how about you? Self-care.
Yeah, I think that I personally know there's the saying like you have to fill your cup before you fill others, which I don't totally subscribe to just because I've seen myself do pretty well running on empty, but I know it's not sustainable. So all that to say, I struggle with self-care still. But yeah, so I know it just, everything goes so much smoother if you can fill your cup first and take care of yourself and nurture yourself, right? So, but I guess today just, I was nervous about this and I wanted to like, maybe should I devote all the time I had in the morning to just preparing and thinking through these questions? But I decided to take time for a Zumba class that I've been doing that's free. Actually going to put it in the chat. I want to give a shout out to the teacher who my first Zumba teacher I've had, and she's been doing this on Twitch ever since the whole shelter in place, and it's free. You can Venmo her a donation, but I took the time to get a little exercise and dance, and I think I'm really glad I chose that versus just getting nervous and anxious about this all morning.
Yeah, I thought I was going to spend hours too, just like thinking about the questions and the topics, and I just decided to go hike for 2 hours and just connect with nature. But Lance was dancing, y'all, this morning. Sheening, what were you doing this week, and what do you think of self-care?
I agree with what's been said already. I think being in a profession providing care to others, we really can't do an effective job unless we take good care of ourselves. And I'll just put it out there, therapists are notoriously bad about their own self-care. And I think the shelter-in-place process and working remotely has really forced me to examine that and integrate like daily and weekly practices that I totally did not do before this. So for that, I'm really grateful. And it's everything from making sure that I have my enough time in the morning to have my typical morning routine, which involves like making breakfast, doing a little bit of exercise, watching like one episode of like something funny before I start work, and maybe like five to 10 minutes of mindfulness, to scheduling a walk in the middle of the day, even like 20 to 30 minutes, because the rest of my day is back-to-back Zoom meetings of all different kinds. And then I think it's also being mindful when I might just need I have a very strong introverted side. So when I just need some time to just be quiet and just be okay, like being quiet, not necessarily doing anything active. Sometimes it might be like reading a book, but sometimes I just like kind of sit in the corner and just have my eyes closed for a little bit. So I think there are practices that we can integrate on a daily basis that don't take a whole lot of time, but you realize after you've done this, like for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, actually that actually does make quite a bit of difference. So I encourage everyone to do that. Even like 5-minute mindfulness meditation practice is a good thing to integrate it every week or every day, excuse me.
Meditation is where it's at, everybody. I discovered that 2 years ago, and it's part of my practice today too. TJ, self-care.
Okay, so my self-care has to do with that falling down washi tape chart in the background, which it's not worth looking at. It's empty. But, my version of self-care is most often creation. And I feel like when I get depressed, it's really hard to make things, especially right now. There's such a big artistic influx of like art about isolation and loneliness. And I wasn't really vibing with that. So instead, I decided to start writing a mini series about my friends, like loosely based off of my friend group. And so I got to put queer and BIPOC characters at the center of a narrative and put them in a world where they get to do all the things that we used to do and like have simple narratives and stories that I found enjoyable and that I'm really excited to finish because I've never finished like, I don't know, a full story before. And I'm not a writer either, but it was just so like, this was my big self-care project. If I can't actually hang out with my friends, what I'm going to do is write a story, mostly myself, but then with the help of my friends, so that when we are all good to go, we'll actually get to spend time together producing and filming it and everything. So that was my like, I've been working on that still this week.
Awesome. It's like your own version of folklore, a little Taylor Swift. Your little quarantine project, and we'd be excited to see it. Lance, Jamie, TJ, Sheening, thank you so much for being generous with your time, making space on a Saturday to come do this and share some pretty personal things. But I have personally been enriched by it, and I hope that everyone in this chat has as well. Again, this is the first of many conversations that we will have on mental health in the Asian and the queer communities. And I hope some of y'all in this chat will step up to get your voice heard and your perspective heard too, because it's definitely helped me and it will help other people as well. So stay safe, take care, and stay brave, everyone.